Thanks, everyone, for joining us at the Project Censored radio show on Pacifica Radio. We are very glad right now to be joined by Arfat Sheikh, who's a Kashmiri American filmmaker and producer whose storytelling focuses on identity, occupation, and the lived realities of a Kashmiris. His debut feature, Saffron Kingdom, is a bold and emotionally layered film that blends fiction and documentary to reflect on memory, resistance, and Kashmir's ongoing struggles. Originally from Kashmir, now based in Washington, D.C., Arfat holds a master's in communication from Leeds Beckett University and an MA in film from Georgia State. He works with Daffodil Studios, a nonprofit media collective dedicated to producing impact-driven stories for communities often excluded from mainstream narratives. Arfat, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Eleanor, for having me, and thanks a lot for that introduction.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. And the film Saffron Kingdom is an absolutely powerful and beautiful film, beautiful in both terrible and positive ways, as I imagine the Kashmiri experiences. And I kind of want to start just by diving right in here because there's a line in the film that just, I mean, a war against freedom and memory. And it feels to me like perhaps the most succinct and powerful line about settler colonialism that I've heard. And it also highlights this horrible struggle between trying to forget and needing to remember, of needing to relive these traumas so that they can speak again for the next generation and for the people outside in the world. Can you talk a little bit about this struggle and how you felt that you needed to highlight that in the film as one that is particularly important to you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great observation. And one of the reasons that why I wanted to make this film, and absolutely with, of course, I always say that it's a collaborative effort because I was lucky to get an executive producer who was ready to invest in a movie because he also thought that, there is dearth of our cinematic representation. But it wasn't just the dearth of the cinematic representation, but it was the erasure of us as people that was happening. And it was happening, I mean, it was happening for long, but then it started kind of like, gaining momentum when the BJP government came into power in 2014, and that's when we were like attacked from all sides, and wanting to make sure that there isn't anything in the memory in even internet's memory that kind of like supports or that kind of talks or humanizes us or our struggle. So I think that became the reason for me to actually tell our story through the medium of film, which I thought was important and is powerful. But coming back to your question, that why did we, to strike a balance between not wanting to tell and wanting to tell? I think that was the most difficult part because I think us as Kashmiris, there's a lot of this transnational repression also happening. There are a lot of people who are being spied upon. There's I mean, of course, it's not unfounded. You probably know about the reports of how the Sikh activists were killed in Canada. There was a lot of like noise that was created just a few months ago. And then, again, like keeping the surveillance, monitoring Kashmiris here, like any sort of dissent. It's not just restricted to just Kashmir or in India, but now it's beyond the borders. And I think, there's also that sense of fear that India has been successful in instilling in anybody who is dissenting or is actually fighting for their rights. So to strike a balance, do we want to tell the story to others, or how do we tell? Because there is, of course, repercussions of speaking out. Your people back home could get harassed. I mean, they do get harassed. Or if you're not in, if you're in another country, your passport would be, impounded. I mean, I've had a lot of my friends who are journalist friends who are like still in America in exile, but their exile, it wasn't a self-imposed exile. It was an exile when, they were here in America, but their passports were impounded. That means they're not even able to go back back to their homes. Now, with those who are part of the diaspora also, because there's a strong angle of diaspora also in the film, to kind of like convey a message like, hey, unless and until we don't tell our stories, don't expect any change, because people need to know what's happening. But with the diaspora also, it's like, okay, their OIC cards get revoked. OIC cards, their only ways of, being connected to their homeland because they don't have to apply for visas and stuff. So that also has become a bit of a problem for the diaspora because there's this constant fear, that psychosis that has been created, that hey, you can't really speak against India. The moment you do speak, you have to face the repercussions, which would mean raids. In back home, their relatives get harassed, and sometimes if you have a brother or you have a father, they even jail them because it's a technique or a tactic that India usually uses to kind of like further oppress you. So I think that was what I was, juggling with also. I mean, I also wanted to kind of it also speak to the diaspora here that hey, we have to, speak. If we do not speak, I don't think how people, I mean, how else we expect change? Because you and I also understand that, like I said, it's not unfounded. There are people who have, you know, faced the wrath of India, and their properties get confiscated back home. There's a lot of other stuff. So I think that's what this film speaks of. I mean, when you look at the main protagonist, which is Masrat, she's juggling with, she's also wanting to survive, also wanting to find a husband who's been abducted, who we show is an activist, and all of these characters are like inspired by real people. So but at the same time, she doesn't also want to speak because she knows that if she speaks, her husband, she still has that stick of hope that she might want to find him one day. But just by speaking out about it, that could also mean that she's jeopardizing that hope. Maybe he's alive, because that there are like tens and thousands of Kashmiri men who have been disappeared by the Indian army, and the women are still waiting. They're still protesting and wanting to know what happened to their kids and kin, their brothers, their husbands. Um, we have this organization called the APDP. I don't know if you know about it, which is like the Association of Parents of the Disappeared. They used to stage protests every month on a certain day, but like, of course, ever since the Modi government came, even they're not allowed to protest that, because anything that exposes India's war crimes in Kashmir, that's a big no. I mean, that means you could have the National Investigative Agency app. They can be put after you. Just kind of give it to give all of this a bit of a sense of legitimacy in the eyes of the mainstream Indians, to say like, okay, whatever we're doing in India, it's okay, it's justified. Because that's how they try and continue to dehumanize us as community and as people.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for all of that. And folks might recall on the show, we not too long ago spoke with educator and author Arfat Sheikh. And before that, we also had a so-called empty chair interview, which was highlighting the impossibility of Kashmiris to report on the ground, because I had reached out to a Kashmiri journalist who then said that they weren't able to join the show for fear of repercussions against their family. Um, and I was wondering if, because towards the end of the film, there's this moment where, she now has those stories and she can write about them. And basically there's this moment and where her family member says, use this as you see fit. So, and that to me is also one of these like very heavy moments, because it is now the baton has been passed. You have these stories, you have this information, but as you just touched upon, and as we've covered on this show, there's this almost absolute censorship that isn't just localized in Kashmir, but also targets people in the US. So in terms of this, like, use it as you see fit, I mean, how do you feel that this film is is a creative way to kind of get around that? And also, have you struggled with the decision to make this film in terms of your own safety or the safety of your family?
Absolutely, I have. I mean, I think, I like I said that, I said initially in the interview also that if you do not speak up, I don't think that I could expect any change, because I think people need to know what's happening in Kashmir, and just to create that awareness, there has to be some of us who have to, go be in the forefront. And yes, they've already started a campaign. They have these fake Twitter IDs that they call Disinfo Labs and everything. They've already started a campaign against the film, against me, tying it with, okay, we've been funded by so and so. Try to malign the whole effort. So yeah, I mean, one is that of course I do have an evident threat, and they've already started that. They've actually gone to see some of my relatives back home also. That was like a kind of letting me know that, hey, we know where your people are. You know what I mean? That's like a technique to tell me that we know where they are, and you gotta stop. You gotta stop. But then, like I said, like you also pointed out, like, just use it as you deem fit. When her aunt says to Mustard and gives her that journal, I think that's what, Atazia is also doing, making sure that she's documenting in her own way, like writing a book, or Hafsa Kanjwal, who did it. I mean, of course, you must be aware that there were 25 books that were banned by India recently, and some of those books are written by these prolific academics such as Atrazia, Hafsa Kanjwal, Mona Ban, Haley, and others, a lot of others. So I think there are, that's why this film also is an endeavor in the same way, but then of course it's a cinematic representation of what Athar is trying to do, Hafsa is trying to do. So I think that yes, there are ways to employ, and that's why she becomes a writer. She becomes a writer, and she wants to, like, release. Of course, I'm giving a lot of spoilers here, but then you know what I mean. I mean, that's the kind of, like, that's the route she takes. She's like, okay, I mean, it's been enough. I gotta speak up. They've kept us under their boots. That's actually literally, I'm quoting a dialogue from the film. They kept us under their boots for too long. It's time to now, release that had hard massacre. And that's when they go back into the 90s to understand. And I think it's important. I think it's important to document our history. It was documented already, but like I said, since 2014, there has been an effort by the Indian government to make sure that anything that is there, even in archives, through internet or wherever, they make sure that everything is, burned down, or they delete everything from the memory. And it also becomes important for us as people to make sure that we continue to document what is happening, and all those war crimes that India is doing. We somehow put it back into the memory of the people, and into the system. And I think this film is a small step towards it. And like I said, there's already been a lot of work that's being done by these exceptionally smart women who fortunately come from Kashmir and have witnessed some of that violence themselves, and them documenting it makes it even more powerful. And that's what irks the oppressor. That's the reason why they resort to such tactics of wanting to harass you even further, or like sending people or sending spies beyond their Indian borders to make sure that somehow they want to stop you and muzzle that voice. But I think it's you have to have people who have to speak about it. And I don't know. I mean, I really don't have an answer to that. That how do you strike that balance? But I think I chose my calling for a reason, because I also was somebody whose father was disappeared. Like, he was one of those cases, because he was a famous musician also. And at that time, I also felt that that agency was taken away from us. We didn't even know anything. So even the newspapers started writing a narrative. He must have fallen off the train, as if they were with him at that point in time. You know, um, there was no postmortem done. He was cremated, even though he was a Muslim person, because you could easily identify he's Muslim. Because of course Muslims are usually, I mean, in Kashmir, you wouldn't be a Muslim and wouldn't be circumcised. It's not about choice. It's about, like, okay, you are Muslim, you have to have you need to be circumcised. And he had his ID cards and everything with him, and everything was left on that train. And he just disappeared. And a few days later, we were told to there's a body that they found. We went to, and I was pretty young. I was still a teenager, and it was so hard to understand what was happening. My relatives went there to collect the dead body, not to collect the dead body, first to identify if it's him, and then to kind of course, get his remains. But the moment they reached there in Punjab, and they were told, like, oh no, we already have cremated the body. So there wasn't any due, course of like normally you have to keep a body in a mortuary for 72 hours because that's what the law says, but they did not follow any of that because he was a Kashmiri, and I don't even know if it was him. You know what I mean? We don't even know if it was him. Then we had to kind of start. There was no closure that we got, but that was like something that happened personally to me as an individual or to my family. But then when I started working in Kashmir, wanting to document these because I started working for a not-for-profit, and I saw like, okay, I'm not alone. There are families that have gone through worse, you know and that's why I think this film is a collective effort in a way for us to remember us as people and humanize our struggle and say like, okay, this is what is happening to us, and the world needs to pay some attention to this part of the world. Maybe it's not a superpower entity, but still you gotta see what's happening there, and you gotta speak about that too, because I think that's what this film wants to do, to create a solidarity movement and people to understand like, okay, we are also, like I said, human beings. We also have emotions. We also feel angry. We also love. We empathize. We are all we are the embodiment of everything that makes us human beings, and we're not just these vile human beings that Bollywood portrays as. Bollywood is the Indian film industry. Like any film that you see right now that comes out of, like most of the films that come out of Bollywood right now is like, you need to have an angle of Kashmir in it. Okay, we're gonna find the terrorists in Kashmir. Who are those terrorists? Those are us. We are being demonized, and that's also a way, like I said, to justify the killings in Kashmir. That, hey, they're showing it to the mainstream Indians that, hey, we're doing this to punish these people because they are so and so. So that's the narrative that's being peddled, and I think that's why I say that this film is trying to reclaim that narrative. And we're taking that agency back, and this is a Kashmiri telling his own story. Same way when Attar is writing something, Attar is reclaiming that. Hafsa, so all these Kashmiri, artists or academics or writers, um, all they're trying to do is the small step towards, wanting the world to know that, hey, I mean, please pay attention to what's happening to that part of the world also, and don't let people disappear.
Yeah, absolutely. And recently we had on the show Dr. Ramzi Baroud, who's a Palestinian author and intellectual and journalist, and he said that you can't actually have the truth unless the indigenous people are not just content creators, but actual producers of the media. And I think that that's a really important aspect here, is that like, it's not enough to just say like, oh, we have a Kashmiri in a film. Okay, but did you talk to a Kashmiri? Are they actually telling a story from their perspective, or are you putting words in their mouth? And I think that's the other thing that's really powerful about your film, Saffron Kingdom. And I think that it's also interesting with the way that she remembers things in the film. She's not clear about what happened that day when her father was disappeared and basically taken and kidnapped in the 80s. And it seems to me that when she starts to remember, this is when she finally feels that she's more able to actually share it. And this also speaks to that, what we've been talking about, the power and, of course, the trauma of remembering, and also the role and the threat of art, right? Because I mean, you're a filmmaker, and the role of art in being a way to tell a story is therefore a threat to the people who want to make sure that those stories are silenced. And of course, we see this with regards to what Israel does, not just to journalists, but to poets and to academics and to intellectuals. And I wanted to get to something as well that I thought was that it was a very short scene, but it very much hit home because there's a scene where Riswan, who's the son of the main character, he's sitting with his friends and they ask if they can help, and he gets frustrated and he walks off. Because I think that this speaks a lot to the current situation, not just with regards to Kashmir, but from everything from, the migrants being kidnapped off of our streets, and Gaza, and, access to basic things like healthcare and food. People want to do something. They're well-meaning,
Right.
but they don't know how. They mess up and they misstep. And it's so often the people who are most impacted, like in this case, Riswan and Kashmiris, who are constantly asked, like, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? Which can itself I feel also fuel those feelings of helplessness and despair. And yet at the same time, you have Masrat's colleague at the university who wants to help her get this book going and wants to help her write. So could you talk a little bit about like the because nobody exists in a vacuum, right? Kashmiris in the diaspora, how do you feel that people who are interacting with Kashmiris and trying and want to help, what is what do you feel that that relationship should look like, or what do you feel are ways that it could look like that could help amplify the work that people like you and others are doing?
It's a, I mean, it's a loaded question to be honest, but I'm just going to talk about the challenges because that probably would also speak of, why there is that silence and why Rizwan says there's always something happening. His response to that dialogue is there's always something happening in Kashmir, and then he just, he just leaves the conversation because he doesn't want to be part of that conversation because it's unsettling because and I think that is also a true representation of the diaspora here in America because I moved around the same time when the abrogation of articles happened in 2019, and it was exactly the same time. So I actually was the part of that, the whole. I mean, of course, at that time, what you see in the film also when the abrogation happens, it's exactly how people were trying to get in touch with their, loved ones to understand that if everything is okay there, because that it was an abrupt communication blackout. It just really happened in the midnight because they had to do something the next day when Amit Shah in the parliament announced that this is what we're going to be doing, but the Kashmir was cut off, communication was cut off. So I think this silence that you see and not wanting to share that what we can do is again, it also tells you like how helpless Kashmiri diaspora also is because at the end of the day, they also they don't want to sever their ties of not being able to go back home. You know, and that's what I say that there's always this how do you strike that balance, but ultimately it moves into silencing you in a way. I mean, it kind of like it's silencing people not to tell their stories, not to tell you like how they can help. And I think that like I said is literally a true representation of how even the second generation here in Kashmir. And now I'll tell you why I was wanting to tell you about the challenges. I wanted Kashmiris to play these Kashmiri parts, and when I opened the casting call, I didn't have any Kashmiri apply for it. And then there were a couple of them who were interested and they said, like, yeah, I would. But then they came back to us and they said, like, no, we spoke to our lawyer. And he said, like, no, you won't be able to go back home. And then another one came and she said, like, oh, I mean, my dad said, my OIC card would be revoked. And then you won't believe that in some scenes I needed the wedding chatter, especially when it goes back into 90s. And I need there's a wedding scene. I needed this wedding chatter. I wanted it to kind of feel as authentic as possible because again I was creating these scenes here in Atlanta, even though I was telling people I'm in Kashmir. um, and if so, when we went into Kashmir and I wanted that chatter, I asked a few diaspora women that if they can come and then lend their voice for the chatter. It was no visuals, just the chatter. I wanted it for the sound design. None of them did come. A lot of these guys were like, no, I mean they're gonna recognize our voices also. But ultimately, I found like a few brave ladies in Atlanta, and they were like, "Yeah, I mean, we'll come." But I mean, of course, they had to be assured that we're not going to be taking any picture in the studio. We're also making sure that we'll distort the voice quality a little bit because it cannot lead back to who you are, which I think is anyways difficult. But then I'm saying the fear is real, the fear is real that you don't want to even lend your voice to the film. So that's the kind of atmosphere that has been created. So I think when you said, what is the feeling with Rizwan? Also, it's not, and you know that before that scene, Rizwan is told by, I mean, she's scolded by her mother not to say what he's saying because words like that can put him in trouble or put his mother in trouble because there's this constant fear that yeah, they're watching us. They're watching us. And let me also give you another example of now that this film is actually releasing in different places. I'm not kidding you that I have less than 5% of Kashmiris Tamil watch this film. It's just been non-Kashmiris watching this film. And you will ask me why. It's just because they fear that the spies could be in the theater also. kind of making sure that who all are these Kashmiris are going to watch it. It's been a struggle for me also. Like when I did my DC event or an Atlanta event or like in other places, there aren't many Kashmiris who are coming to watch it because they're so fearful that there's somebody going to be watching, taking pictures, and this is going to go back home. So that's the reason, that when Rizwan says, yeah, there's always something happening because he's always wanting to know what happened to his father also, which you also understand later in the film. But then he's not able to decipher it. He's not able to, understand what all is happening. And that's the reason that he's like, okay, and he's always been, told not to speak about, who you are and not to reveal your identity in a way, which is, of course, which is done very subtly. Like when they're scolded not to say, and then he calls his grandmother. And grandmother says, like, your mom has gone through so much, it's hard for others to fathom. But hey, words such as these can, put you in a lot of trouble. So I think, yeah, that's a true reflection of how the diaspora here feels and still does. I've been trying my hard to, ask them to come out and watch this film, but it's been a real struggle. But at the same time, I'm really, really happy that they're happy that something has come out, which truly speaks of our experiences. And at the same time, it's a lot of non-Kashmiris going and watching this film. So I think, there's always a silver lining, like they say. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to sort of end with this question because I also appreciated that, and this is something that I've noticed too with how Palestinians have talked about how Palestine is covered or various places that are under extreme oppression, that it's not just trauma, right? We are, these people are not just their trauma. We are, complete human beings. And what I appreciated in the film too, there were these beautiful cultural moments where you got to see snippets of Kashmiri culture, whether that be the wedding scene, where you got to see these beautiful moments where she's getting ready and getting dressed, or where Nusrat is at prayer in the morning and she's looking through the Quran and things like that. And I wanted to ask you too about why you felt that it was important to share those moments and to highlight that, yes, it is important for people to know what's going on in Kashmir because it is so traumatic, it is so terrible. And yet, the thing that we want to hold on to more than our trauma is in fact our beautiful culture. And how do you feel that people are able to do that if people are not even able to, admit that they're Kashmiri?
I mean, I think one ways of how the diaspora has always been together was, through these small cultural events, even here. Like that's the only way that they connect, because we have like some collectives here in America or elsewhere also, but then it's strictly like, hey, no political talk. So it's like, I mean, you see that there's this elephant in the room that nobody wants to address. We have these big, now these conventions happening where Kashmiris get together and they celebrate the Kashmiriness, and it's all about culture. But nobody wants to talk about the trauma, which I understand why. Like I said, I mean, I explained it to you also. Like in America, this like, and it's a strictly no. Nobody can bring up politics because it ruins everything, because nobody wants to relive those experiences. But I think it's also at the same time beautiful also through this culture also you're telling a story. I think everything has, and plus, and I believe that there isn't anything in Kashmir which is Kashmiri and doesn't is not political, because we were shaped by it. I grew up, like you said, that Mustard has these fragments of memories. It's everybody who grew up in the 90s would tell you that, yeah, we have the same kind of memories, the raids, the crackdowns, like these night raids. The night raids that you see, it's literally what has happened to a lot of families, wherein the police would barge into your houses. They'll desecrate, usually they desecrate your religious scriptures also. That's what I tried to show, but I didn't also want to, of course, be disrespectful to our religion. But at the same time, then how the husband was abducted. This is all true, and those little moments of the culture was like, okay. I mean, I also wanted to introduce people that, okay, we are human beings too. We have culture. We have these beautiful moments too. It just our trauma does not define us. Of course, it is part of us, but it's not the whole of us. You know what I mean? There are these beautiful moments also that kind of like gives us an expression and humanizes us as people also. So that's the reason I was like, okay, I need to also introduce people to our culture too, but at the same time, be proud of who we are, of our heritage. And I think that's what this film is also doing, going back into that into that era, to show you our food, how we do our weddings, what we wear, how do we sing, how our songs being sang. You saw that beautiful one woman that, when you see everything, when she's when she's getting into the when after she gets ready into the room, that all of that is like a real stuff that happens in Kashmir. And I think this film also talks about that Mustard wanting to know what happened to her family. She's asking those hard questions. We do not deal with our traumas. All we do is like we get together, we celebrate our culture, we don't talk about it. We know there is an elephant in the room, but nobody wants to talk about that elephant in the room. And that's the fear that has been instilled, and which is not unfounded, which is true. I wouldn't say like, okay, these people are crazy. They're thinking, no, we've had people get disappeared. We have people get killed. We have been people, harassed. There's a lot of diaspora who's not able to, go back home. They haven't gone back since 1970s, 1980s. Why? Because they spoke about, they exposed India, through art, through conferences, through work that they're doing, around Kashmir. It's crazy. It's really crazy. I tell this to people also. Like one of the striking things of me growing up in '90s is like the home that I lived in. The next home was of a Kashmiri Pandit who had left Kashmir, but those homes were given on rent by these Kashmiri Pandits. So these army guys literally lived like next door. It wasn't like we had to wait for them to come. No, we were constantly living under the under these um, army personnel with their guns hanging, and all the time bomb blasts happening, or they're killing somebody. You're hearing this news. So this was a norm in 1990s. When you see the radio broadcast also in the film, this is the true representation of how it used to happen, because you wouldn't even have electricity also, because they'll shut the electricity down. It would be a blackout, and the radio was your only means of wanting to know what's happening everywhere. And at that time, nobody would trust any local news. So BBC, Deutsche Welle, they became, Voice of America. People would tune into those radio stations because they had these Urdu services also, and people would, listen to that and see like, okay, this is what is happening here. This is what is happening, because it was so highly monitored. You wouldn't have local news would only just peddle propaganda and nothing more than that.
Well, yeah, and it's funny because you mentioned Voice of America, which is perhaps one of the biggest propaganda
Yeah,
machines in the U.S. And of course, the BBC is also a
even the
propaganda
BBC.
machine.
Yeah, yeah,
But it's like it also goes to show, and we talk about this on Project Censored a lot, that nothing is a monolith. So, like, yeah,
yeah.
every now and then the BBC gets something right, and every now and then the New York Times gets something right. I mean, it's rare, but like it also goes to show you that you can't just say this is always wrong and this is always right, because that's really just not how humanity and the media work.
Yeah, it's again like what suits you, also what suits New York Times. For them to actually be little truthful about Kashmir, it didn't really matter home. You know what I mean? It was like something that was outside the, you know what I mean, outside the propaganda that they were doing or are doing. And same for BBC. But for us as people, we would never trust All India Radio. We would trust Voice of America more. We would trust BBC more, or Deutsche Welle more, because we knew that, okay, they're a third party entity. At least they're going to give us, you know what I mean? Because they didn't have like those vested interests. I mean, they may, I don't know, but I mean, it just seemed that they did not.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean that is another good a good critical media literacy point there. It's like look at who these people are paid by and what their interests are, and then if they're talking about something outside of that, then there might be a good chance that they're being accurate. Um, but yeah, Arfat, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us and talk about your film, Saffron Kingdom. Folks, whenever you get a chance to check it out, please do so. And yeah, thank you for making the film. Again, it is beautiful and in all of the ways, both uplifting and terrible.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thanks a lot for having me, and thanks for this conversation. I think it's important to continue to have conversations such as these, and I really do, appreciate all the work that you guys are doing. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you. It's been our pleasure.